It's known as the Black Dahlia case. The killing of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short is one of the most gripping unsolved mysteries in American history.
You remember that murder case? There's new information.
It's back in the spotlight with TNT's I Am the Night. In January 1947, Short was found in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. A mother out walking with her child made that grisly discovery. Elizabeth, naked and cut in half, her body drained of blood and left in an empty lot. The case was splashed across newspapers nationwide. Her killer was never found. Or was he?
And of course, I was very close to my father the last 10 years of his life. And there's no way. I said, I know Dad was, had some sex problems and, I believe with the incest. But murder, no way.
Steve Hodel is a retired LAPD homicide detective. His father, Dr. George Hodel, was a suspect in the Black Dahlia case. One of his daughters, Tamar, also accused him of sexual abuse. George was tried and acquitted in the highly publicized case. But Steve didn't know this until he struck up a conversation with her after their father died in 1999.
I started talking with Tamar, my half-sister, who I hadn't really spoken to in about 50 years. And she basically comes out of nowhere in our phone conversation, says, well, our dad was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. And I'm saying, what are you talking about, Tamar? Where the hell is this coming from? And she says, well, he didn't do it, but he was a suspect.
14 years into retirement, Steve started researching Black Dahlia, initially to vindicate his dad. Once he saw the evidence mounting, it became hard for him to ignore.
I found actual original receipts for 50-pound sacks of cement during the week that she was murdered at the house, and they were at the crime scene. So we've got the physical evidence connecting. But one of the most important things are the secret DA tapes, where they bugged the house for 6 weeks and actually tape recorded his confessions to the murder of his secretary, to the Black Dahlia murder, and to payoffs to law enforcement, to performing abortions. All of this was on tape and hidden away in the DA's office.
Steve says the case was tight, and authorities were literally looking for him to lock him up. Before they could get the chance, George skipped town in 1950 and started another life and family in the Philippines. 40 years later, he'd leave Manila and move back to the U.S. Steve says his family is split on George's involvement in the case.
There's 11 children by 5 different women, so mostly they're on board. He married a Filipina when he left the country, and had 4 children there. They're not on board. They're like, no way that our father could be a serial killer.
Steve has written several books combining what the FBI and LAPD found with the evidence he continues to come across.
This was all sub rosa on my part, secret, and then I presented it in secret to a head active DA, Steve Kay, who was co-counsel on the Charles Manson case. And he reviewed it for like 4 months and said, I got a tough filing policy, but, I would file one count of murder on your father were he alive, and the witness is available.
I got some more information about that trial you might be interested in.
The family's complicated history returns to the forefront in TNT's limited series. It centers around a fictional reporter named Jay Singletary, played by Chris Pine. He's investigating the very real case of Fauna Hodel, Steve's niece. Fauna's mother, Tamar, gave her up for adoption to a black family. Fauna spent much of her life believing her birth father was black, which turned out to be false. The show is based on her 2008 book, One Day She'll Darken. It follows her journey as she learns exactly who her family is, revealing the fact that George was her grandfather.
This girl, she's the key. Can you dig it? Okay. Can you dig it?
Steve says he doesn't plan on watching the series because of the fictional elements. However, he is part of the Root of Evil podcast, also being released in part with TNT, detailing his work. The irony of it all isn't lost on Steve, a kid who grew up to be a homicide detective at the very station house that held evidence alleging his father was not only the Black Dahlia killer, but may have been responsible for other deaths too.
Much to my surprise, it wasn't just that. There were serial crimes. There was a bunch of lone woman murders that occurred in L.A., and he was responsible for about, I believe, 10 or 12 of those. Yeah, and LAPD was actively looking, and the DA's office were also looking at him for other murders. It's not just me again. It's there were 4 or 5 that they were looking at. I would eventually come up with about a dozen in that period before he split.
Proving, in this case,
it's so complex and involved a story, and it's like you couldn't make this story up. It's the old saying, truth's far stranger than fiction.
For InsideEdition.com, I'm Stephanie Officer.